Bound just after Highbrook Drive. It's 26 minutes past 7.
And your morning report, the government is easing its self-imposed budget responsibility rules, allowing it to spend more money if it's re-elected. The Finance Minister says it's likely the current net debt target of 20% of GDP will be replaced with a target range of between 15 and 25% from 2021 then 2022. That would mean the government would have the scope to spend up to $15 billion more a year, or save more if that was appropriate at the time. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, joins me now. When you, in the last election campaign, you were elected on the basis of a budget fiscal responsibility set of rules that was in a sense about the electorate trusting you, that you would stick to these rules, you would stick to managing the books. Haven't you now breached that by signalling you're going to change the rules?
Not at all. What we've said and what I said yesterday is that in Budget 2019 we will once again meet the budget responsibility rules, which include other things other than debt. It includes sustainable surplus as well. But yes, we will keep debt at 20% of GDP, and we're likely to continue to do that for some considerable time. What we said yesterday was we're obliged under the Public Finance Act to give a long-term fiscal projection, so past the period of which the budget responsibility rules timeframe was. What we've indicated is we think we should probably move to a range. A fixed point, can potentially drive choices that you wouldn't want. But this is in the future. This is actually from the financial year that will begin on the 1st of July 2022. It's a long way off. We will be meeting the budget responsibility rules that we set ourselves.
So what's the spending? You're giving yourself more money, potentially. Can you give New Zealanders a guarantee what you're going to spend that on? Could it be used for infrastructure, roads and bridges, which will generate economic wealth into the future? Or will you use some of that money to pay for operating expenditure, which potentially, you've got to build in every year, welfare benefits, whatever it might be?
Well, the first thing is it could actually mean spending less money at the range, because that's the whole point of a range, is actually that if it goes from 15 to 25%, there's the ability to alter the level of debt more closely to what the actual economic circumstances are.
But you must acknowledge that you're being criticised from the left. We've seen reports from the likes of Ganesh Nana just recently, lots of people, and from the right, saying New Zealand needs to spend more on infrastructure. You need to be doing more. You need to be paying teachers more. You know that criticism's coming there, and then all of a sudden, there's more wriggle room for spending. This is about your government being able to spend more and do more and deliver the things it wants to do, isn't it?
No, this is about making sure that for future governments, there is flexibility to be able to respond to particular economic conditions. We are satisfied with our debt target of 20%. We believe that gives us the balance to be able to make those big investments in schools and hospitals and roads, while also at the same time making sure we don't burden future generations with huge amounts of debt. Having a specific single point target, however, the advice we've received is we're better off having a range. We are currently sitting at the midpoint of that range, and you'll see when the budget documents are released that we are, for an extended period of time, projected to sit around the middle of that range.
Doesn't it feel like the pressure suddenly has been released a little bit and you've got a little bit more wriggle room, to quote the word of yesterday? And isn't that risky, because you're trying to get discipline, aren't you, in your spending, and discipline in your government department, so that if there is a financial crisis, you're lean and mean and ready for it.
But we have, and we are sticking to those rules that we have. We have had fiscal discipline for these 2 years. We will for next year, and we will into the future. And actually, we have now net debt tracking towards a position that the previous government never actually reached. So I believe we are showing that discipline. What this is about is a realistic assessment of the fact that having a single point target may mean, in certain circumstances, you're forced to make a particular decision that isn't appropriate for those economic circumstances. So, for example, if there was a major economic recession, you would want more room to move. This is just about the framework. Our position around fiscal discipline hasn't changed, and as I say, when you see the budget documents, you'll see that we are sticking to debt levels around that midpoint of that target.
So if there was a global financial crisis of some sort, a global slowdown, some might argue a domestic slowdown, the New Zealand economy slowing down for other reasons, business confidence, these sorts of things, will you then borrow more money so that you can continue to make welfare payments? There would be more unemployed, so you'd have to pay more unemployment benefits. Will you borrow money to do that, or would you run zero budgets like Bill English.
Look, and those are the decisions you have to make at the time. Certainly the conventional wisdom is that when you're borrowing money like this, it should be going into the productive economy. It should be going into the infrastructure, as you mentioned before. But particular circumstances will dictate that. The point being that the example you've given of a recession or a significant slowdown is the example of why you want to have a range rather than a single specific point. Now, I'm comfortable with where we are in terms of the balance that we've struck between making big investments in fixing schools and hospitals and building up our transport infrastructure and keeping fiscal discipline. I'm comfortable with where we are. We're obliged under the Public Finance Act to say what will happen post 2022, and that's what we've done. We've said it's a range, but as I say, you'll see when the books come out that actually we're sticking to that discipline. But just on that
question, just to be clear, you would borrow if you needed to. Well, it's a terrible term. They call it automatic stabilisers, don't they? Which is whereby the economy slows, more unemployed people, so that the government has to spend more. You would borrow to do that if necessary.
Well, that's what the flexibility would be given to a future government. But there are other ways also.
Is that a yes?
There are other ways also. Well, because it's a hypothetical question in the future. What this does is put one tool in the toolbox, which is debt. There are other tools, obviously, as well, which governments consider from time to time when they face that kind of potential recession. We're not there at the moment, Corin. We're talking about something that might happen in 2023. The really good news is that in Budget 19, as in Budget 18, we've met our self-imposed rules.
But it's important, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, Kiwis can understand that if you're borrowing for, capital items that are going to give you long-term growth, then that makes sense in some ways. But if you're borrowing to have to sort of get by, and that's different. So it's the quality of that borrowing that matters.
Look, I don't disagree with that. And as I said, the conventional wisdom remains that you should borrow for those things. And that would be the way that I'd approach it. But we are in 2019. We're talking about a framework for 2023. Between now and then, what you'll see is the government doing exactly what you're saying, which is making sure that we continue to invest in schools and hospitals and infrastructure. And yes, debt is part of that, but we're also growing the economy at the same time, albeit potentially a little slower than we have.
One final quick question, because we've got to go. In the last budget, you borrowed money off the government's balance sheet, $6.5 billion. NZTA, Housing New Zealand, you allowed them to do their own borrowing and then didn't include it in your net debt target. Will you do more of that in the next budget?
Look, those numbers will come out on the 30th of May, but that ability for Housing New Zealand to borrow was set up by the previous national government. It provides some discipline to Housing New Zealand so that borrowing's on their balance sheet. That will continue, yes. It's because we need to build a lot more houses in New Zealand, but that's not defined within that net core crown debt.
Still government debt, though, isn't it? You're in the can for it.
I'm sure your listeners would love us to get into a discussion about the generally accepted accounting principles, but it's fair to say that the way debt's structured is within those principles.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson, thank you very much for your time on Morning Report. Appreciate it. It is 26 minutes to 8.
You're listening to Morning Report, and coming up before 8 o'clock, Pharmac, its secret list that ranks the medicines it's